My name is Oliver Bast. I'm a senior lecturer in Middle Eastern history at the University of Manchester. And I'm also, for my sins, the executive director of that organization that you will have all joined by now or are already members. That is the British Society for Middle Eastern Studies, BRISMES. In any case, the panel is called Identity and the Nation. And our first speaker on the list is Zach Smith of the University of Pennsylvania, entitled Beyond Arabised-Jews, Radical Mizraḥim and Arabness in Israel.
Okay, so I just wanted to say a brief thank you first before I start my presentation to MESNET for having me here. I did 2 master's degrees at SOAS in London, and I have great fondness for British approaches to politics and for my time in the UK, and it's great to be back. So without further ado, I guess I will start. So until the mid-20th century, the vast majority of the Mizraḥim, Israel's Jews of MENA origin, had lived in communities that had existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, stretching across time and space from medieval Andalusia to Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and even India. Jews were to be found virtually everywhere under Muslim and European colonial rule. And at least in comparison to their Ashkenazi counterparts in Europe, MENA Jews were, on the whole, generally well integrated and indigenous to their countries of origin, forming an inseparable part of their social and cultural life. This situation presents to the contemporary observer a sort of inexplicable paradox. We are invited to ask, it seems, but don't Jews hate Arabs and Arabs hate Jews? In essence, reflecting on the impossibility of the history we observe. In then observing the syncretic past against the polarized present, we can further probe the nature of MENA Jewish identity in relation to the 2 poles on which it now is determined, Jewishness and Arabness, or in Hebrew, Yehudiyut v'Arabit. What is an Arab Jew? Moshe Bihar has already explored this work. He's an academic at the University of Manchester, and he's explored this in the ways in which the identity polarities of Jewishness and Arabness interact in the figure of the Mizraḥim. In work that situates Arabized Jews, a term that he has coined basically, on the edges of Jewish and Arab nationalisms. He posits that MENA Jews, prior to immigration to Israel, were culturally and linguistically Arab, but did not define themselves primarily as Arab, let alone in political terms. In framing the experience of MENA Jewry in terms of Arabization, how Jews become similar to their Arab neighbors, Bahar leaves open a few intriguing avenues that this paper will seek to uncover. First, Bahar leaves open the question of what exactly constituted the political identity of Arabized Jews in the pre-1948 Middle East and North Africa. Second, Bahar's framework implies that someone or something was Arabizing Jews in their regions of origin. And third, Bahar gives the time of immigration to Israel as a plausible endpoint to this process of Arabization, but he does not explore other ways that that process could shift, invert, and ultimately continue to inscribe itself on the identities of Jews of MENA origin in Israel. In essence, Bahar's research leaves unanswered the question of how Arabization influenced, shaped, and directed the development of Mizrahi identity. This paper, then, will seek to untangle these 3 related lacunae in the literature on Arabized Jews. I propose that the Arabization discussed by Bahar is but the first of 3 processes of Arabization that manifest themselves in different ways and with different agents. In the first, native Arabization, the surrounding culture and language were responsible for the Arabization of MENA Jews, in that they adopted an Arabized identity in countries dominated by mostly Muslim Arabs. The second phase of Arabization, then, takes place at the very moment of immigration and is reinforced in a decidedly non-Arab culture, Israel, a culture based in part on distancing Jews from Arabs. And I call this phase Allo-Arabization, literally other Arabization, which nods towards the creation of Mizraḥim as Zionism's internal others, the Arabs inside the Jewish community. Finally, a third phase, Auto-Arabization, has also formed part of some Mizrahi identities. By Auto-Arabization, I refer to ways in which Mizraḥim themselves adopt what they consider, consciously or subconsciously, to be Arab practices and Arab traits. And in both of these last 2 cases, I want to stress that what I'm proposing is that native Arabness must be erased in order for newer, more stylized forms of Arabness to be inscribed on Mizraḥim. This is fairly obvious in the production of Oriental stereotypes evident in Allo-Arabization. But in the case of auto-Arabization, I ought to clarify that what Mizrahim produce when they auto-Arabize is an ideal type of the Arab past, a reclamation of something that may never have been. What I call Allo-Arabization, which is the first subject I'll turn to, involves the projection of identified Arab characteristics onto Jews whose formerly Arab or potentially Arab identities have been erased or made impossible. Allo-Arabization operates in a particular context formed out of the dual Jewish and Zionist experiences in the European diaspora, in which Jews found themselves an internally colonized people. Aziza Khazzoum notes that this colonization particularly operated at the level of discourse, in which Oriental stereotypes, the name Asiatics, for instance, covers all of these texts on European Jewry in the late 1800s, were used to denote Jewish existence in Western and Central Europe. Zionism was one particular response to this stigma, and yet Zionism is far more complicated than its European nationalist peer movements. For Zionists, migration to Palestine and the formation of a Jewish collectivity in one place was a project of becoming European. As Achat Ha'am famously said about Theodor Herzl, what Herzl understood is that only by leaving Germany and settling in the Jewish state could the Jew finally become a real German. Thus, inasmuch as Zionism was a project of Jewish national liberation and of settler colonization of Palestine and its inhabitants, it was also, and perhaps most importantly, a last-ditch effort to refashion Jews into the Europeans they were always meant to be. As Khazzoum concisely puts it, the strategy Jews used to become Western was to produce other groups as Eastern. In practice, this meant that Western European Jews orientalized other Jewish populations, just as they themselves were orientalized by their non-Jewish European counterparts, thereby situating themselves in an ideational hierarchy that allowed for them to approach the non-Jewish European ideal. This process, however, was not limited to Western and Central European Jewish orientalization of the Ostjuden, the East Jews, in the Russian Pale of Settlement. Rather, it continued with the Ostjuden, who together with Central European Jewry orientalized their MENA Jewish counterparts, who then, along with everybody else, orientalized the non-Jewish Arabs in their indigenous societies or in Palestine and its surroundings. This great chain of Orientalism, as Khazzoum puts it, has the effect of westernizing, in quotes, its orientalizers and Easternizing its subjects, Jews and Arabs alike. In essence, it is not just through immigration and settlement of Palestine that Jews could become Europeans, but it is through integrating themselves into a hierarchical, race-centric, and colonial framework that the Jewish national movement and Israel could become Europe. Importantly, the characteristics applied to each of the populations in the chain of Orientalism, the Great Chain of Orientalism is what she calls it, were by and large the same for each group, Jews or Arabs. The characteristics that produced the stigma attached to Jewishness in the European Christian psyche thus became meaningful for Jews generally, such that Jews could come to believe that by erasing religiosity, traditional clothing, narrow streets, even employment and sales, and replacing them with enlightenment, progress, modernity, secularism, rationality, reason, and non-Jewish Western European culture, they could become more European. Conversely, when Jews observed such characteristics or projected such characteristics onto other populations, the response that became natural was to marginalize these communities. When these communities were Jewish, marginalization became difficult when combined with the egalitarian ideals of Jewish nationhood embodied in Zionism. These characteristics, as they did for non-Jewish Europeans, became fused in a binary dichotomy that produced an East and a West. And it should be noted, the dichotomy persists. The Association of Israel Studies' next conference in 2016 is titled, A Western or Eastern Nation, the Case of Israel. All of this, by the way, I think it's both. All of this is an argument for viewing Allo-Arabization, as I call it, solely as orientalization of MENA Jewry, particularly in Israel. Yet it is precisely in Israel where orientalization as such breaks down in favor of twin processes of forced assimilation and modernization and Allo-Arabization, that is to say, the assigning of Arab characteristics or an indelible Arabness more broadly to Mizrahim, thus producing them both as Easterners and as Arabs in Jews' clothing. For the Ashkenazi pioneers, the threat posed by Mizrahim was not solely their connection to the East or their supposed religiosity, but precisely that this particular East was the East of the monolithic enemy, the Arabs. For Ashkenazim, there remained always the nagging suspicion that the process of modernizing Mizrahim had not gone far enough, that the truly westernized self remained always at a remove and could not totally be captured. Ashkenazi Jewry had dedicated itself to creating itself as part of Europe, and part of this European identity was the enemy against which Europe was and is formed. Already by the medieval period, and for some time before it, Gil Anadiyar shows that the Jew had emerged as the theological or the internal enemy, and the Arab or the Muslim was the political or external enemy. And the differences between these two figures appear to merge over time, if not immediately, into the more nebulous figure of the Semite. As Said aptly put it, the processes of Orientalism at work in European thought transformed the Arab into the Jew's creeping, mysteriously fearsome shadow. And we should note this also happens vice versa. It is this same process of developing a European sense of self, belonging, and nationhood that is central to the continued production of Mizrahim as Arabs. Upon being brought to Israel and or expelled from their countries of origin, native Arabization is immediately stripped away from Mizrahim, denied as part of their public identity, and hidden away in private. Yet simultaneously, characteristics are assigned to Mizrahim that are deeply associated with the Arab in the Ashkenazi mind. They are Allo-Arabized. It was this Arabness that was subject to the intensive modernization process in the development towns, the education system, and the hierarchy of labor, and it was this Arabness that justified the system's existence. In this way, we can see the close connection between the European internal and external enemies and the Zionist project as a whole. For, if the Zionist project was also a process of becoming European, then the Zionist project similarly needed an internal enemy and external enemy against which to define itself. The primarily European pioneers found their internal enemy within the Jewish people in the Mizrahi, who would contain something of the Jewish nation or people within itself, but yet have some irredeemable and unerasable mark of non-Jewishness about it. The figure of the Mizrahi was produced from the already Orientalized meaning Jewish populations, and in subsuming these populations' diverse experiences, under the broad swathe of Mizrahim, Zionists effectively marked Mina Jewry with an Arab stigma that could never be washed off. The external enemy, however, could remain the same, and indeed it always does. The Arab was the source of all the Oriental characteristics of which Jews had always been accused and always tried to excise. Thus, as the European Jew attempted to become fully European by leaving Europe, its discursive processes in constituting its enemies and thereby itself were remarkably similar to that of Europeans more generally. So I'll turn now to auto-Arabization. In recent years, and indeed in the early years of Israel, I don't want to suggest that these processes were chronological, they indeed happened at the same time. Processes of a third phase, auto-Arabization, also formed a part of some Mizrahim's identities. Auto-Arabization, because it is a process led by the self and by active engagement with the other, comes out of an experience that is uniquely Israeli. In this sense, then, auto-Arabization never escapes the Israeli prism, nor does it seek to. It creates figures who exist at the edges of cultures and societies, figures that, as Levantines, exist as a mixing of East and West. Two ways in particular that Mizrahim engage with the erased Arab past are through relearning Arabic and through music. One of my informants, Eyal, adopts a variety of identities: Mizrahi, Arab Jew, Egyptian Jew, according to the situation. To call himself an Arab Jew draws attention to his linguistic prowess. He's fluent in Egyptian Arabic, and to Israel's location in the heart of the Arab world. To learn Arabic is to connect with an Egyptian Jewish culture and heritage that spans centuries, and to establish connections across borders through films and cultural codes. Thus, learning Arabic is in one sense non-ideological, even if it leads to a politicized self-understanding as an Arab Jew. Yael, an Iranian Jew, is engaged in a similar process with Farsi, but also speaks fluent Fusha and Palestinian Arabic. Netta learned Arabic in part to connect with her Moroccan heritage, but also to engage in the Palestinian national struggle. Tom uses his admittedly minimal Arabic in Adala, an organization advocating for equality for Israel's Palestinian citizens. These stories serve to highlight the depth of connection that young Mizrahim feel between Arabness and Arabic language. Yemenite Jewish music, on the other hand, is laced with discussions of salvation and redemption, returning to Zion. In June 2014 in Jerusalem, I attended an evening of Yemenite musical performances accompanied by traditional Yemenite instruments and poetry readings in both Hebrew and Judeo-Arabic. The Hebrew and Judeo-Arabic, which is Arabic written in Hebrew characters, program that was printed reflected an open melding of cultures. Yemenite religious Zionism finds its fruition in the literal return to Eretz Israel. Between songs and poems, performers would regularly address the crowd saying, Ani sameach ki anachnu po ba'aretz. I'm happy because we're all here in Israel. The performers' views reveal the syncretic view of Arabness and Jewishness. Hila told me of her childhood when she felt ashamed to be Yemenite, when she dropped the het and the ayin from her speech, and she was pronounced Mishtaknezet, which is to say, becoming Ashkenazi, by her cousins. Now she's finding her place between Europe and the Middle East, and singing Yemenite songs is a positive, enriching encounter with past and present. Making Yemenite food is like going back home. Shilan, a young Yemenite singer studying with the famed Gila Beshali, explained to me that we are fighting with us. Her statement blurs the boundaries between Jewishness and Arabness. Who are we and who are us? She continually referred to the East peoples in an open conflation of Arabs and Arab Jews. And yet, both Hila and Shivan are not Arab, at least in their own self-understanding. They are Jewish, and explaining any Arabness is really difficult. I'm going to skip quickly to my conclusion.
Zach, I hate to interrupt because it's fascinating, but I need
Are we right there?
to wrap up.
Yeah. Can I do one more paragraph or one more sentence?
A conclusion.
Yeah. I'm right there. This paper has explored the processes of Arabization and expanded them into different temporal and spatial possibilities. And yeah, I'm trying to skip through so I can skip most of my conclusion. You know what? We'll leave it at that. I think it pretty much concludes on its own. Thank you.
Thank you very much for